Welcome to Bit Dodgy In It, the paranormal podcast starring myself and Peter Renn, coming back after a few week absence. How are you, Pete?
Oh, you're working on the old accent there, mate, aren't you? A bit
Well, we had a
dodgy.
lot of time in the truck when we went down to Idaho to
We,
Gooding.
we, we did, we did. Yeah, it was a very memorable road trip, that's for sure.
I think that was one of the best, at least in terms of the work we've been doing, the best sort of paranormal road trips we've had yet.
Yeah, it's kind of like a punchline to a joke where you've got there was a Canadian, a French Canadian, and an English guy all in the truck or in a bar, one of the two. All that was missing was a newfie, and that would have just topped it all off.
It would have, wouldn't it? No, that was, because it was literally an English person, a Canadian, and a Frenchman.
Yeah,
Sharing a vehicle for the maximum. I think the trip back was what, 18 hours?
yeah, but about that in the end, and it was good. It was good. I enjoyed it. It's always good to go drop down south and see our friends in the States, and they definitely got some interesting places going on down there. Seems like a lot better than what we've got up here, that's for sure.
At
In
least
relation,
they're open to us going in and talking about it. I
yeah,
think that was the
yeah,
best part. Yeah.
I was kind of half thinking about taking semi-retirement and just going on a full-blown road trip down there, but I don't think my finances will allow me, and certainly not my wife.
Yeah,
So
I have both situations here myself, Pete.
yeah, pretty much. But anyway, and I'm Peter Renn. This month we're taking a trip down one of the most haunted roadways in America, Zombie Road.
Yeah, which is something I think we're going to have to take this road trip, Peter, but we'd have to go all the way to Wildwood, population 35,000, which is located in St. Louis County, Missouri, where there are a series of trails that cover a long gone road that's a hot spot for paranormal activity, including ghost sightings and spectral screams. Woo! The roadway used to be called Lawler Ford Road, but is now primarily a pedestrian and bike trail, officially called the Al Foster Trail. However, locals and ghost hunting enthusiasts have taken to calling it Zombie Road. This is a 2-mile long path adorned with legends and superstitions, many of which are said to occur only at night, and it's naturally attracted the attention of many interested in the paranormal. Sounds like the makings of a horror movie, eh, Pete?
It does, and it's. I actually did some Google research before we jumped on the show, and it's like I think it's about 29 hours away road trip. So if you want to jump in a truck and drive down there for 29 hours, you can go at it because I certainly will not. I certainly will be.
Laughing in British, because
Yeah,
that's
I
double
certainly
what we
will
just
be.
did.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So I've read. Well, not read. There's been a few YouTube shows or ghost hunts that have been published on YouTube that have gone on around there over the last few years, and it does kind of spike some interest. It has spiked some interest with me, particularly with certain parts of the area and with the so-called evidence that they've captured as well. And it's obviously like we deal a lot with houses and homes and stuff like that, but obviously there's a lot of roads and streets in the world that carry that kind of energy and are legitimately active as well. So as far as I know, it is pretty well documented, but proof is in the pudding.
Well, yeah, and that's as is the case with any allegedly haunted location, right, Pete?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Well, let's find out a little bit more about this zombie road. Native Americans were the first to use the trail in order to gain access to and cross the nearby Merrimack River. In fact, rumor has it that the road sits atop one of the largest Native American burial grounds in the United States. By the time the Civil War broke out, the path had become an often traveled route west. In 1868, the Glencoe Marble Company mined the area's first limestone deposits and set up a small railroad. Years later, a judge's widow was actually killed by a train there. As time passed, trucks became the dominant mode of transportation on the road, hauling stone and gravel from the Merrimack River along the dirt road until the quarry shut down in the 1970s. The road eventually weathered away, and in 2010, Wildwood paved the path and renamed it Rock Hollow Trail. The trail is officially closed after dark, likely for safety concerns as opposed to anything sinister actually going on. As we can see, Peter, this sets up the road as a place where there's been a lot of activity and historically a place where several deaths have occurred, be they Native Americans, Confederate soldiers, children, or industrial workers.
You've got a whole concoction there of possible reasoning behind paranormal activity. You've got the minerals in the ground, like the limestone and stuff like that, and obviously the Native American element to it as well, with possible, there's bound to be some kind of burial ground or spiritual attachment to that trail as well, along with the what went on in modern time. Well, modern times being when the settlers went out there with the Confederate soldiers, and no doubt there was a lot of battles fought around that area as well, because it is kind of in that location where there was that war. So it's definitely an intriguing place, that's for sure.
Well, the land along Lawler Ford Road was a popular place in the 50s for youth to park their cars. It kind of became even a lover's lane, to coin a phrase at the time. In fact, that's about when this area started to get its reputation as a crossroads for the paranormal. The story goes that a man named Zombie had escaped from a local mental hospital and disappeared along Lawler Ford Road, leaving only his blood-soaked clothes. He's rumored to live in a shack in the woods and attacked any teens who park on the road. The nickname Zombie Road followed soon thereafter. Marrying this story with the history of the trail, I kind of get a sense, like the old story about the hook, that would attack people on lovers' lanes, etc. What goes through your head, Peter, when you kind of hear what we talked about historically and then mixing it in with what very much sounds like sort of a modern urban fairy tale?
Sounds like a movie, doesn't it?
It does. They should just call it Zombie Road.
Well, the guy that was called Zombie anyway is just it plants a brilliant new I don't know, Stephen King movie or something like that. But
it does. They can even get Rob Zombie to play like the zombie guy or something like that.
No, it does. I be honest with you, like I said earlier, proof is in the pudding with me with a lot of these places. It does, it does build a lot of character for somewhere that could be active, and you can never say never. And I was up until last week, I was very skeptical with a lot of American sites that are allegedly haunted, and just proof was in the pudding where we went to in Idaho, where it was probably one of the most active places I've ever been in, like the past 27 years, with the amount of evidence that we captured and personal experiences. But yeah, it definitely intrigues me for sure.
Do you think kind of people hearing these stories, like the story about this zombie guy who escaped from a mental hospital, living in a shack out there, kind of fuels people's hopes and desires that there is something kind of paranormal going on out there more than there actually is something paranormal?
I think so. Well, even like with the name Zombie, that, like I said earlier, it automatically sets that picture for a haunting, with urban myth being, or an urban legend being, that zombie still walks around this area and stuff like that. And it could be just common folklore in regard to that. But it's definitely an intriguing place for sure.
While doing my research, Peter, I came across a 2013 incident involving a woman named Alex Matusik, who claims she and her aunt went for a late night walk on the trail and had a frightening encounter. Quote, "There are stories that everyone has heard of this trail, and my aunt was in town, so we thought we may as well go and check it out." She told the news source 5 on Your Side. Quote, "We were back quite a ways. The road wasn't paved when we were walking the trail originally, so the brush was very high. At first, she started feeling what she described as some strange sensations, and then heard a sound as she described as high-pitched squeal, as if made by a teenage girl or young woman. At that moment, she also felt a sharp pain on her leg. Turns out she was scratched, although none of the clothing she wore was torn." Now, Peter, we weren't there when this happened, and we're not saying it didn't happen or wasn't paranormal. But as someone with 30 years of investigative and research experience, what do you make of this story, Peter?
I think obviously the skeptical side of me kind of paints that picture. If you're walking in any given place in the dark, and you suddenly get scratched, it does paint a picture. It could be a branch on a tree and stuff like that, and it wouldn't automatically tear clothing as well. Like you can walk through bushes and you can get something brush up against you, and it can quite easily scratch you without penetrating any clothing or anything like that. So that particular story, I'd like to replicate it again. I'd like to, you know, go through the walk just to ascertain whether there was any natural reasons behind it before I even consider it being paranormal. Even though obviously the place does have that story to it.
And lots of animals can make what could sound like a squeal like that. Birds do, foxes. There's all
Yeah,
sorts of explanations. That's very much to me sounds like someone getting themselves worked up in that situation. With all respect, Alex Matusik, you know what I mean? But you can easily work yourself into that frenzy.
it does, and it could have been any noise as well. I'm not playing it down or anything like that, but when you're scared, you hear your ears sometimes hear different things to what actually does go through. So it could be a number of things, natural things that could have caused it. I mean, there is wild boar in Missouri and around that area as well, I believe. So it could be a pig, it could be a wild pig. You don't know.
And they make a squealy noise.
Yeah, they do, especially in that film Deliverance.
Squeal like a pig. Locations like Zombie Road are quite common across North America and the world, as you kind of touched on earlier, Peter. Most are strictly the likes of urban legends. Do you have any locales like that back in England, like stretches of road that are supposed to be haunted, Pete?
Yeah, there's a few. Just one example. When I think we brushed upon this before in a previous show. Where I was brought up in Croydon. Basically, back then it was a part of the county Surrey, and before it became a part of South London, it was. Was very fortunate growing up right by the side of the countryside, and there was a lot of country lanes that intertwined the county Surrey to Kent. And allegedly along that road was a guy called Dick Whittington, who was it was standard delivery. He was a highwayman that would jump out on people in horse and cart back in the I don't know back a few hundred years ago, and he'd jump out with a pistol and shout out "Stand and deliver." And he actually got captured and he got beheaded. And the story goes around where I was brought up is that there's a headless horseman been seen around the country lanes late at night when people were driving through and stuff like that, and they connect it to Dick Whittington. So that's
interesting.
There's a lot of as you move around the country as well. There's a lot of other stories of different variations of that as well. But the common one is highwaymen that would jump out, and they would be ghost apparitions and stuff like that.
How many of these zombie roads do you think are actually haunted?
Oh, I don't know. It's a very very question, because where would you even start with answering a question like that? We'd have to have a look at ourselves, I would imagine, before we pass judgment on that. I always try and stay away from the word haunted. I'd rather stay with the word active, because it sounds more like a Peter Sellers movie or something like that kind of thing. So I don't know. A fair percentage of them, I would imagine, like I said earlier, with the energy that's produced throughout history and stuff like that. And energy does connect with other fabrics, other materials, such as the ground and the minerals and stuff like that, as opposed to just houses. So
yeah, and you're right to say, like, it's better like we like to use the term, society in general likes to use the term haunted because it's an easy way to explain it, but active is better, because I think every place has the potential to have some form of activity. It just varies on how active it is.
It does, and it's more to do with the like the definition. And we're not qualified in the field in what we do, and we can't certainly say that your house is haunted, right, or my house is haunted, and that kind of thing, because we can't pass that off, because we're not qualified, and we never will be. I'd rather just say I'd rather deem it as being active, where there is things going on, but we can't explain.
Yeah, and I think that's, and I'm glad you kind of mentioned that, because there's a lot of people like to throw the term expert around
Yeah,
in
we're
this
certainly not.
field. I'm an expert with 30 years experience or 25
Yeah,
years experience.
yeah, 100 years experience, but I'm an expert, subject expert on the paranormal, which I'm not. No one is.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
Impossible. Well, that does wrap up this edition of Bit Dodgy In It. Peter and I will be back in a fortnight with an all new investigation. Until then, I'm Jason Hewlett.
And I'm Peter Renn. Stay spooky.